How would you like it if that was your kid refereeing that game? Or a kid that you know, and you had guys up here yelling at him, and they said, "Well, he's gotta be better." I'm like, "It's a freaking kid out there. It's a kid refereeing this game, trying to do the best he can." Parents who think it's their right or they have the right to get on these young kids who are referees, I have no time for them at all, and I think they should be out of arenas. Who wants this, right? Is it you wanting this for your daughter or your son? Or is it your daughter or son putting in the extra time and work without being reminded on a daily basis? It's their own initiative. They are controlling the narrative as far as the time and effort they're putting into it. At the end of the day, out of all the players that I've seen move on and have success at different levels, it's always come from within. Everybody thinks hockey parents are crazy. Well, I can tell you, soccer parents are just as crazy. I have a lot of friends who have their kids in cheerleading. They tell me stories, and I'm like, geez, maybe hockey isn't so bad. So I think everybody is a little bit crazy. It's just what degree. People spending $30,000 to $70,000 a year to send your kid to an academy. Listen, each to their own. I can't, generalize everything, but for people just to think, oh, I'm going to spend that much money, that's going to equate to success for my kid. Well, you completely lost the plot. You're delusional. That's not it.
As a professional hockey player, Brendan Morrison played with the best of the best the world of hockey had to offer. As a parent, he doesn't like that best on best narrative is being sold to children and their families at extremely young ages. Hey there, I'm Scott Rentoul, the host of Better Sports Parents. And wherever you're watching or listening, you probably know that the goal of this podcast is to help you, me, and everyone else out there become a better sports parent through conversations with elite performers throughout the world of sports, coaches, experts, former players who have been to the highest level and want to share their experiences and their opinions on what we are seeing in youth sports today. Well, Brendan Morrison's career is certainly one that any athlete could hope for. He was the top player in collegiate hockey, winning the Hobey Baker Award at the University of Michigan, and from there was drafted to the National Hockey League, where he would go on to play over 900 games across 7 different franchises, most notably with the Vancouver Canucks, where at one point Brendan centered the top line in all of the National Hockey League, and it was known as the West Coast Express. Since he retired, Brendan's kept his hand in sports because he's a parent of 4 children, all of whom have gone through almost all of their youth sports journey, as you're about to hear, and who have all achieved collegiate level status in their respective sports. But that was never the plan. That's not what Brendan and his wife, Erin, set out to do. It just happened that they got there, and it was a very low pressure approach. But he's seen a lot as a parent over the past couple of decades, ushering his kids through. He's been a coach along the way as well. And he's here to share his insights with you and what he sees today in the world of youth sports. So here is Brendan Morrison. Brendan, thank you very much for doing this and spending time with me here on Better Sports Parents.
Scotty, it's always good to chat with you. We go back a long time, the early 2000s, but yeah, this is going to be an interesting conversation, I think. In today's world of kids sport, it's an interesting one for sure. So it'll be fun to have a chat.
Well, and you've seen it for a long period of time because you've been at this with youth sports for the better part of 2 decades now. Where are your 4 children at in their journeys with youth sports?
Yeah. So 4 kids, like you said. I have a son who's an '02 birth date. I have a daughter in '03, another daughter who's an '05, and another daughter who's an '08. It's funny when you start having kids, you don't refer to how old they are. Like they're 23, 22. It's their birth years, right? So my son, who's the oldest, he's actually a senior at Miami of Ohio. He's playing college hockey in the NCHC right now. My daughter, who would be my second child, but she graduated last year. She played soccer at the University of Miami of Ohio. She's now out in San Diego. She's in naturopathic medicine school, a 4-year program out there. My third child, a girl, she is going to be a junior at Miami of Ohio. She plays soccer as well. And then my youngest daughter is at home. She's a senior or in grade 12, and she plays hockey, and she's committed to go to Union College in upstate New York, which competes in the ECAC of women's Division One college hockey.
So you have seen it all through soccer and hockey and probably a variety of sports. Before we get into the individual details of your four children, what sports did they all play growing up? Did you expose them to a lot of different things, you and Aaron?
We did. That was kind of our philosophy early on with our kids, and that's kind of how I grew up. That's how my wife Erin grew up. We always felt that it was good to play other sports. It was good to be dynamic. It was good to think differently. And we felt that no matter what sport you played, all that translated back to your favorite sport, whatever that was, and made you look at things differently. So, when our kids were younger, like my son, for example, who ended up selecting hockey as his favorite sport, like he played baseball, he played some soccer when he was younger, at high school sports, basketball, volleyball. So, I mean, there's 5 different sports right there that he played. He played lacrosse as well, and he actually played football. So he's played like 7 different sports, right? My oldest daughter, again, soccer was her main focus eventually, but school sports, again, basketball, volleyball. She played hockey when she was younger. My third child, Kaylin, who ended up, choosing soccer as her favorite sport. She figure skated. She played basketball. She played volleyball. She's the one child out of my 4 that did not play hockey. To this day, she kind of gives me heck, like, Dad, you should have put me in hockey. I said, well, I asked you and you didn't want to do it. I wasn't going to force you to do it. And then my youngest one, Taylor, who's now focusing in on hockey, same type of thing. She played soccer, she played basketball, she played volleyball. So again, just kind of an array of different sports.
As we talked about, your kids are older now, and some of them have been through their NCAA journey. Your youngest daughter is now just about to embark on a college experience through youth sport. Since your son started in youth sport when he was very young, how have you seen the youth sports landscape change?
I think the biggest thing when I think about youth sports now is everybody wants to pyramid these kids at an earlier and earlier age, meaning you're trying to get this elite competition right at the top of the pyramid, and you're really not giving opportunities, I guess, to as many kids when you're pyramiding to this elite level of play. So there's a lot of kids out there who are late bloomers, not only physically, emotionally, but this whole concept of we need to have best on best all the time. And now it seems like no matter what sport you select, you know, everybody thinks hockey parents are crazy. Well, I can tell you, soccer parents are just as crazy. I have a lot of friends who have their kids in cheerleading. They tell me stories, and I'm like, geez, maybe hockey isn't so bad. So I think everybody is a little bit crazy. It's just what degree. But really trying to pyramid kids at an early age now, I think is the biggest difference. Like, let's talk hockey, for example. And, when my son had kind of gone through the minor hockey system and he got to in Calgary, they have a quadrant system where the city's divided into 4 quadrants, but you still have, a system where you played for an association based on where you lived, right? It wasn't like no boundaries like a lot of things are now. You can pick up and go, you can change every year, you can follow this coach. But when he kind of got through that minor hockey towards the end of it, that's when you kind of saw an introduction of all these high performance leagues, right? Where people formed these leagues that were outside of like the jurisdiction of Hockey Canada. And it was like the Wild West. You'd recruit these kids, kids that are 7, 8 years old were paying ten to $12,000 a year to play on these travel teams so they could bus around Alberta or bus around, you know, British Columbia to play against the elite competition. So I don't know why or how this happened, but I don't know if it is the best thing for sports, right? Everybody you build these super teams and everybody's like, yeah, we were 42-0 this year. Like we smoked everybody. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, so what did your kid really learn this year? Like obviously you learn how to beat up on a lot of teams, but did you learn to deal with any adversity throughout the season? Did you learn how to bounce back when, hey, maybe you guys had a tough game or you ran into another opponent who is maybe just as good or better than you? And so there's a lot of different things that go into this, but the biggest thing, kind of get back to my original point, is really this pyramiding of kids and pushing this eliteness on kids at an early age.
I get the sense based on what you just said and the number of sports you laid out that your children played, that that is not the route you chose for your kids, that early specialization and those super teams.
No, we didn't do that. And again, maybe there weren't as many opportunities for my kids at that age, but I think even if there would have been, I don't think I would have pursued it. At the end of the day, when I think about, what's kind of the end game or the end goal for your kids or whoever's kids, but for our kids specifically, Aaron and I, it was, what do we want to get out of this? Like, being through it myself and kind of getting to the peak of my sport. And Aaron played college volleyball, and she was a good player for sure, a good athlete, and her dad was, played professional ice hockey. She's been a kind of been around it, grew up with it. But at the end of the day, when we sat down and talked to each other when this was all happening, we're like, listen, we know the chances of our kids making a living out of playing sports is very, very minimal. Like, realistically, you might have a better chance to win the lottery. And you would never tell your kid that, right? Because you want them to chase their dream and you want to push them, you want to encourage them, and you want them to go all in and do everything they can if that's what they want to do, right? That was our mindset. But we said, we want them to be good people. We want them to learn life skills, right? We want them to learn about being accountable, being a good teammate, dealing with adversity. If there's an issue in the locker room, how do I go about talking to somebody? Right? All these things are life skills that apply to real life, which eventually, no matter what you end up doing, those are the most important skills that you're going to get. But I think some people have lost track of that, and I think with the emotional investment that parents have in sports, along with the financial investment nowadays, I think parents almost look at it as if they need to see a return on their money. And that return for a lot of people is, well, if they don't move on to play junior or if they don't go on to play college hockey, it was a failure. But I think we need to address that and change that mindset of like, no, you know what? Like, don't let sports define you as who you are as a person, right? There's much more to life than sports. But in the moment, that's really what everyone gets caught up in. But like I said, it's all these other things, life skills that you're learning along the way that are going to help serve you in everyday life.
Well, you and Aaron were on the same page with respect to that, and I'm certainly on that same page as well with respect to youth sports. But as you mentioned, it's very easy to lose the plot given how much money is invested, how much time is invested by people these days, and the thought of all this money going in and nothing, and I say nothing in quotations, coming back in the term of a hard return on investment. So when you're talking to those parents, because you've been around them, and most of them are very good people, they've just lost their way a little bit. What is your advice in terms of what they should look for as a return that isn't maybe as tangible as they might look at right now?
Right. Well, I try to talk to people about, what is your kid learning? Right. What are the things that are making them become a better person? Like, listen, for me, playing professional hockey gave me so much in my life, and it was absolutely incredible. I wouldn't change it for the world, right? It was phenomenal. And if my kids had the opportunity to go down that path and do it, phenomenal. But you just have to be realistic, I think, right? Like, if things fall into place and that happens, great. But you can't have the sense of failure or disappointment if that doesn't happen, because there's such a small fraction of athletes that get to do that, like make their living playing their sport. So again, it's about learning different skills, how to interact with people. From you take what you learn in the dressing room or on the ice or the pitch or the court, and how does that translate when I get into an office building at some point? And like, you're presented with certain challenges. Okay, I think you can go back and you can kind of lean on your years as an athlete and help problem solve what you're doing today. So that's kind of the message that I try to talk to parents about is don't get so caught up in the end game. It's like the process along the way, right? And are you learning things and these things that will become more important and more applicable to everyday life?
I'm not surprised that you're not a high pressure parent. And I know Aaron a little bit. I certainly know you better, but anybody who knows you knows your personality just doesn't lend itself to that. You're a very relaxed person throughout the course of your life. And I don't want people to mistake that for a lack of intensity because I've seen you at the top level and I've seen how intense you can be. But I'm not surprised that you're not a high pressure parent. But when you're in those environments, what's the behavior that you've seen from parents that we would classify as crazy? Whether you were a parent in the stands, Brendan, or whether you were coaching, because I know you did some of that along the way.
The inability to control your emotions, right? In public. Like, whether you're in the stands, like first of all, message to parents, when your kid is on the ice and is playing, they can't hear you, or very minimally can they hear what you're saying to them. So, hey, it's great to yell, encourage your clap, cheer. I get that for sure, but like to criticize or you know yell things, just blurt things out to your kid. I mean, more than anything, you're embarrassing yourself and you're embarrassing your kid. But some people just cannot control their emotions, right? It's again, it goes back to that. It's that emotional investment, financial investment, I believe. Yeah, I've seen a lot of things like, you know, getting on referees and their kid might be open, but another kid maybe doesn't. I'll just reference hockey again, doesn't pass them the puck, and then you start yelling at the other kid that the kid's a puck hog and he doesn't want to move the puck. Sometimes these kids are 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. They don't understand. They don't even have the ability to process that at times, right? Like a lot of these people, they watch professional sports, so they watch games at the highest level, like the best of the best, like the infinite percentile. And they assume that because these guys can do it, their kid should be able to do that. Like, why can't my kid do that? He didn't see that. I'm like, he's not or she's not trying to not pass the puck to your daughter when your daughter's open. They just can't process it. Like, I'm like, go sit beside the glass and watch how much faster the game is down there when, you know, you have somebody who's tracking towards you. You just receive a pass. Now you got to make a decision within a hundredth of a second. And a lot of these kids just don't have the ability to do it. But parents in their mindset, they have this notion that something completely different than I think is reality at times. And that's the frustrating part.
Well, and it's interesting because all of these kids go to school, and yet we wouldn't throw this massive multiplication question at our kids when they're in grade 3 or 4, and yet we think they should be able to make all the right decisions on the ice. We understand in one forum they're learning, and in the other, for whatever reason, we think they should get it because we do.
They think it should become instantaneous. Or, hey, I saw McDavid and Drysaddle do this last night on the power play. Like, why our kids should be able to do that. They should be able to thread a seam pass like that, or take a one timer from the goal line. It's like, no, I mean, it doesn't work like that. So I think the reality sometimes gets lost in this, and sometimes you just have to take a step back and say, listen, phew, take a deep breath. Well, I've never been a big yeller at games or very vocal. Like you said, that does not mean I'm not an intense person at times and does not diminish my competitiveness, right? And my will to want to go out and win and push and all that, my drive. But I just think there's different ways to do it. But hey, at the end of the day, that's what makes the world go round. You have different personalities, you have different people. But I do think in youth sports, again, we can take a step back here and understand that these kids are still learning, they're still trying to process. I mean, a lot of times their brains cannot conceptually process things as quickly as we think that they should at this age.
How many of your kids did you coach along the way, Brendan?
Well, at some point, I would have coached all of them. My son in hockey, so I was still playing when he was, first starting out playing hockey. So obviously, I was traveling quite a bit. But when I was back in town, there was always an open invite from the coaching staff. Hey, if you can come on the ice and practice, or you want to come out. So that was great. So I was able to do that. Then when I retired from the NHL in 2012, then I got more involved and basically coached my son from or was an assistant coach on the team from 2012 until he went to quadrant hockey, which would have been probably 2017, roughly in there, 18. So 5, 6 years I coached him. Funny enough, I did help with Aaron when our daughters were really young, soccer, right? But definitely not claiming to be a soccer coach, more of a handler, let's say that. I went at a young age, 4, 5, 6 years old. And then now with my daughter playing hockey, and I'm more involved with her on the coaching aspect. I just always felt like, listen, if I'm going to be at the rink anyways with the kids, I'd like to be involved. Um, I think I have something to offer, not just my child, but every kid on the team. I want to help everybody, and just with some experience and insight. I always thought it was a no brainer to give back that way.
There are a lot of parents out there who are watching or listening that have or are going to coach their own kids. Do you have any advice for them? Because I'm sure you've encountered situations where you were coaching your son and maybe you've changed the way you do things now that you're coaching your youngest daughter.
My oldest son and my daughter are 2 completely different personalities. My son is more like me, a little bit more reserved. My daughter is, well, I would say more like my wife, a little more fiery at times. So, I have to almost tiptoe around my daughter a little bit more 'cause she'll fire back at me, whereas my son never said anything. But the one thing I will say, advice to parents that are gonna coach their kids is, I always had a chat with my kids before the season or before the year started and said, "Listen, I'm gonna be helping coach or I'm gonna be on the bench." And I just said flat out, "There are gonna be times when I'm gonna be harder on you than anybody else." I said, "That's gonna be the message that I think will resonate with the team, because I think if there comes a time at all where other coaches, parents, or more importantly, your teammates think that I'm favoring you, then I think, 1, I kind of will lose their respect, and 2, I think you will as well. So be prepared for me to be harder on you." And it's not an attack on your character at all. It's just more of a sounding board at times for the team. So that's kind of how I approached it with my kids. And again, my son was very good at receiving that and understanding. My daughter, we still have our moments now. Like, she's 17, and there'll be times when, I'll try to say something on her bench. But I've always tried to explain to her, listen, it's when I'm on the bench, it's not dad-daughter relationship. It's coach player. So if you talk back to me, I wouldn't take that from another player. So I'm not going to take that from you. Right. So we have that understanding. But for her, at times, it's been a little difficult to separate that, although she's getting better for sure. And we've made huge strides. But I think the biggest thing is just communicating with your kid. And so they know the expectations. Right.
Well, and they already have a relationship with you. And as you mentioned, it's one that has to change a little bit once you get into the sporting environment. But you're also trying to form a relationship with each and every player on that team so that you can help them in whichever way they need to help develop and help contribute to the team as well. Same goes for the parents of all of those children as well. Over your time coaching, what are the issues that you usually have conversations about with parents?
To be honest with you, for the most part, when I've coached hockey, I've been pretty fortunate and lucky not to have any real negative interactions with a parent. I think part of that's just parent meetings at the beginning of the year, laying out expectations clearly. This is what our expectations are. Like, hey, listen, there's certain days that, and I've coached boys and now I'm coaching girls. So completely different, right? Animals. Listen, we understand there's things that might be happening away from the rink, and they're kids, they're teenagers. Things happen, friends, relationships. Sometimes they come to the rink and it's the end of the world, right? With whatever's happened. So certain things that we'll work with the kids on, but there's certain things that are non-negotiable, right? Like, if we have team rules that aren't adhered to, then I mean, you have to hold these kids accountable and be firm that way. But I think, if I've ever really had issues with the one interaction I ever had with a parent in all my years coaching was quite remarkable. And I'll tell you what happened. So it was girls hockey. We had just won the game, and we had a good team, and this particular girl she's one of the better players on our team, and she plays in all situations. I came out of the locker room into the lobby, and the lobby was packed with people. And all of a sudden, this dad came up right in my face and started like finger pointing at me like 3 feet from me and yelling at the top of his lungs, like, "You need to do this and you need to play my daughter and and you need to go talk to the coach." And this went on for like a minute and I had to, like, I actually like had to bite my lip. I didn't say a word. I just sit there and it was tough to not to, and now I understand how there's interactions, physical interactions with certain people at games, right? So I just took a deep breath. I said, "Okay, this is pretty embarrassing." So I went back, and at the time I was an assistant coach. I talked to the head coach. I said, "Hey, listen, I just had an interaction with a parent in the lobby that everyone saw, and it was completely offside. I said, I'm going to give this 24 hours, right? And then I'm going to get in touch with the parent. Are you fine with that?" They're like, "Yeah, no problem." So I let 24 hours go by, and then I called the parent, left a message. They called me back. I'm to say, "Listen," I said, "what you did yesterday was completely uncalled for. And to be honest with you, it was embarrassing." I said, "Not only for myself, but for you and your daughter. If you have an issue, we've always said, just come and talk to us. Like, I have no idea where this is coming from, why this is coming from." Like, it was just asinine. So by the end of the conversation, I think I'd, opened his eyes to a few things, and it got to the point where he was, "I feel terrible. And listen, I can't control my emotions. I have a very difficult time. I need to take a step back. You're 100% right." And it got to the point where he wanted to end up like actually make a donation on behalf of my name to a charity. And I said, "Listen, it's not about that. That it's just about being a good person, supporting your daughter the right way. And if you have any issues, come talk to us." So that was the only time I've really had a really negative interaction with a parent, which was quite shocking to me. But, a lot of times with parents, it'll be like, "What can my daughter do better to get to the next level? Are you seeing anything in her game that she needs improvement on? Or, what's your advice?" A lot of it for me, it comes down to who wants this, right? Is it you wanting this for your daughter or your son? Or is it your daughter or son putting in the extra time and work without being reminded on a daily basis? It's their own initiative. They are controlling the narrative as far as the time and effort they're putting into it. At the end of the day, out of all the players that I've seen move on and have success at different levels, it's always come from within. When your kids are younger, you have to guide them. You have to, explain certain things to them. And even when they're younger at times, you can maybe even call them, you can force them to go shoot pucks, or you can't go do this unless you shoot pucks. But at some point, you can't do that to your kid, right? One, they're either going to be resentful and they're just going to shut down and not enjoy playing the game. Two, they're just going to tune you out, right? And there's not going to be any more improvement. So at the end of the day, any athlete that I've ever seen that's continued to succeed as they've moved up the ladder, it's been internal motivation and obviously encouragement and support from the parents, but it can't be forced on them by the parents.
How much is that extra dedication, that shooting pucks, that going to play pickup hoops, whatever it happens to be, whatever the sport of choice is that the child loves, how much of that, in your opinion, should be in an unstructured environment compared to what we have today, which is, oh, we better go get a different skills coach, we better get a development coach, we got to go for power skating. How much of that should be unstructured, in your opinion?
Well, when I grew up, it was 100%, right? But I understand things have evolved and changed. I get that. But I would still like to see today at least half of it, maybe 75%. Now, I will say when you go watch kids play hockey nowadays, 10, 11, 12 years old, those kids are 10 times more skilled than probably I even was as a young kid, or the average player is. Let's just say that the average player is. But it's so robotic, right? It's like, okay, the skill level is unbelievable. They can toe drag and beat somebody, and then they want to toe drag and beat you again. But I've seen evolution of the game, a lot of individual play now compared to move pucks, jump into space, move pucks, jump into space. We're actually thinking, you're applying what you've learned from other sports to your sport, and you're kind of simplifying things at time. Whereas now, skill levels off the charts, skating's off the charts. On average, players are better players, but I do think the game is more robotic now. right? If that makes any sense. But unstructured to me is where you get to learn your creativity, right? Structured is, again, you're being told exactly what to do every drill, every time you touch the puck. Okay, you're going to get a pass here. We're going to have a tire there. We're going to do a toe drag. We're going to change the angle. We're going to shoot the puck. Okay, that's all good. And I think there's a place for it, but I would rather have, oh, there's free ice or there's, stick and puck, whatever it is, road hockey, which is almost obsolete nowadays, right? That's where I lived. I lived in my cul-de-sac growing up. I grew up in British Columbia in Pitt Meadows. And I think I can remember 2 times skating on ice outdoors as a kid growing up. We didn't have ice, right? It wasn't cold enough. But I lived in my cul-de-sac, and I was fortunate to have multiple kids on my street that loved playing street hockey. So we were out there every single day. And that's where I learned creativity. That's where I learned to try new things. So being on your own and just trying new things, your brain is working, it's making you think. And I'm a big believer that that's where creativity is kind of initiated from.
I agree with you 1000%. I know that's not actually possible, but I'll say 1000% just to emphasize the point. And I'm hearing this from a lot of pro athletes. The other thing, or former pro athletes, I should say, that I talked to on this program, they're saying the exact same thing. Their skill level, they and I'm talking about kids now, their skill level is higher than it's ever been, and it's at a younger age than it's ever been. But their concept of hockey IQ in this particular case, or basketball IQ, or soccer IQ, it's lagging behind where it used to be because it's done in such a silo and it's done in that environment. From where you sit, and I'm talking behind the bench now, can you tell the difference between kids who've been brought up in a single specialized sport and those who come from a multi-sport background with the way they move on the ice and with the way they do things on the ice?
Yeah, you can tell, let's call them athletes, right? Like pure athletes that are able to adapt and play multiple sports. And, all these sports nowadays are trying to push for 12 months a year, 12 months a year when they're 9, 10, 11 years old. Well, if you go and if you play hockey, okay, you want to go play baseball this summer, well, you're going to fall behind. And then that's the parents start get all worked up. Oh my God, my kid's going to be behind next year for tryouts. And we went through it in soccer with my oldest daughter, like when we were in Calgary, spending time in Calgary, and they would play, and then, they would continue on in the summer, and then the team would have tryouts again in September. And once school finished at the end of June, we'd head back to BC, to Vancouver Island. And they would tell us, "Oh, what do you can't leave in the summer. What do you mean?" We're like, "Yeah, we're going home. Like our kids are gonna have they're kids. They're gonna have a summer. Like they're gonna be out. They're gonna be doing things. They're gonna play. They're gonna ride their bikes. She's gonna have a soccer ball on her feet. Like she's gonna continue to practice now. But yeah, she's not gonna be here. But you know what? She'll be there in September for tryouts. And the interesting thing on that particular team that she played for, and they had a very good team. Like they went to nationals every year. But I think on that team out of Calgary, she would have been the only girl that went on to play Division 1 soccer. So is it a product of her not doing that 12 months a year, being able to do other things? I don't know what the answer is to that, but it goes to show you that it doesn't hurt you, I don't think. As long as you are continuing to, be active and you're doing things, I mean, you're not just sitting there doing nothing. But I mean, that's a prime example of, let your kids be kids at times and don't get sucked into the vacuum of how you're gonna fall so far behind. But that's the problem now with parents is, if I don't do it, my kid's not gonna be there next year, and, you know, I need him to play with his buddies, those are his best friends, and then your whole life, and then 8, 10 years go by, and you're like, "We haven't done one thing in the summer. We've been in every rink in North America." Well, I can guarantee you that if you opted to miss a couple things, or I'm not saying stand up or revolt to the team, but have a conversation. Hey, listen, we're going to go do this as the family. We think this is beneficial for our kids to do this. And I don't think that hurts, but a lot of people get so concerned about being blackballed or not having another opportunity because you actually are going to do something that you believe in, right?
You echo exactly what Steve Kindell told me a number of episodes ago. He's the father of Ben Kindell, who's playing for the Pittsburgh Penguins right now. And one of the things Steve said, and Steve comes from a soccer background, as does his wife. And they had been in soccer all the way till he had to leave for the WHL. And that was relocation that took him out of soccer, even though he was playing high level hockey. But Steve told me that to this day, Ben's still never been on a skating treadmill. He's never played in the summer. They wouldn't allow him on the ice in the summer because they wanted him to take a break from the sport. It's worked out pretty well for him. And you're saying it's worked out pretty well for your kids as well. You mentioned earlier that at the beginning of the year when you're coaching, you have that meeting with parents and you say, here's what the year is going to look like. Here's our expectation, and here's what we're hoping to get out of your kids. What are those things that you impart to parents, and how much does that open communication help along the way? Because as you said earlier, you haven't had a lot of interactions that are on the negative side of things.
Yeah, no, you're right. But one of the biggest things I always, and when I was coaching boys more specifically, is I would tell the parent group to have perspective. I said, the one word I want you to really keep in mind this year is perspective. And I would go through the statistics of it. Like, listen, statistics say you have a better chance of winning the lottery than your kid does of going to play in the National Hockey League. Fact, right? But again, with that said, we're going to push your kid as hard as possible. We're going to pat them on the back when they need a pat on the back. But we would never say that to your kid. We want, like I said earlier, chase your dreams. You got to have goals. You have to have these, visions in your head and to push yourself to get to certain places. But as a parent, just keep that in mind, right? So that was the biggest thing that we always told them. And then we just said, listen, like, everybody is going to get an opportunity in different situations. And, we're going to have certain things that we expect from the kids as far as, what time they need to be at the rink, this and that. If things change, we get these kids aren't driving themselves, please reach out to us. So just make everything clear, right? So there's no real gray area of what exactly, when they leave that meeting, there's no like, oh, I'm not sure what we're going to do about this or do about that. Just have everything laid out. So there's no questions, right? And if you do have a question, pick up the phone and call me or any of the coaches or whoever, so that there's no surprises, right? But that's the biggest thing. And then again, I'd always get into, and even more so now that I'm helping coach girls, is, there's now girls PWHL and girls can go on and play professionally now after college, etc. Is again, but still have some perspective. Like, and the big thing nowadays is how the landscape of just trying to educate parents on how the landscape has changed for girls hockey, for example, the next step when they age out from their amateur would be college hockey, right? And how that has completely changed with the transfer portal and how and it's a stressful time for kids and for parents because in the past, if you were a school that had six seniors, well, okay, you need six freshmen to replace those girls. But what's happening nowadays in the girls' game, it's kind of following the boys' game in a sense where, well, you know what, we're going to recruit three girls and then we're going to leave three spots open for the transfer portal. And a lot of parents aren't fully aware of how things are working and they're just, well, why hasn't my daughter been committed yet? So you just try to educate parents as well and then just try to be like, hey, again, it's a process. If things are meant to work out, they will. But again, going back to what we chatted about a couple times earlier, is we're going to focus on them as human beings, right? We want them to come out of here not only as better players and loving the game and wanting to play again next year, but more importantly, better people.
Well, you mentioned the transfer portal, and it feels like that's happening at 11, 12, 13 years old with the way that youth sports is structured today. And I do want to get a little perspective from this on you because I know your son, he changed schools midway through his hockey journey at the collegiate level, and yet he didn't jump right away. He spent a couple of years at Wisconsin, and I don't actually know why it wasn't the right fit, but what did that look like from a family perspective and talking to him about making that move and ending up at Miami of Ohio where he is right now?
To me, the portal, I think, can be a positive and negative. Positive where the situation just isn't working out for the team or player. Okay. And you have a mutual agreement. Okay. We're going to move on. I don't like the fact where you can just pull up and leave every single year now without a penalty. Maybe, in my opinion, I think they should put in a stipulation. Hey, transfer portal is valid one time. Because I think year after year after year, like there's certain kids that have played in 4 schools in 4 years or 5 schools in 5 years. At some point, I think you need to look in the mirror and say, "Listen, maybe I need to address something here or correct something where I can help be a solution here instead of always think I'm the victim and it's always the coaches or whatever." But with our situation, so my son went into Wisconsin as a 19-year-old and, had a decent freshman year. And then the next year, for whatever reason, he just didn't play. And he was on a full ride scholarship to Wisconsin. So, you know, an international full ride to Wisconsin is like $70,000 US a year. I mean, it's big business, right? But he just for us, it was more his mental state of mind where he was just and he's strong and you would tell him all the right things and he would be good. But at some point he's like, I just need to play hockey. Like I'm not playing. Like I don't think I can afford to like not play for an entire year. So then we just kind of went through it. Like, okay, what's the positives and negatives? Make a ledger here. And at the end of the day, it was like, okay, if you go talk to your coach and tell him this is what you want to do, and again, getting him to do that, right? An adult thing to go have that conversation. Where do you go from there? What are your options? So, I mean, he took a bit of a risk. He ended up leaving Wisconsin, walked away from a full ride scholarship. Then he went back to the USHL. He played in Dubuque for half a year. And then he ended up going to Miami of Ohio. So, it's been probably better mentally for him. Again, he's not playing a ton. And even this year, his senior year, he's played one game. He's had a pubis injury. He's been out for like almost 2 months now. So it's tough, right? Like it's a grind. You see your kids go through it, but like the message to him at the end of the day is like, hey, just control what you can control. Like be a good person, be a good teammate. When things are going well, it's always easy for somebody to be in a good mood all the time. But I said a true judge of your character is, when things aren't going exactly the way you want them to, how do you act when you come to the rink, right? Do you change your personality? And I got to give him so much credit that his teammates love him and he hasn't changed one bit. But, dealing with adversity, I mean, as tough as it's been, I think in the long run, it's going to serve him well, right? When he steps out into the real world and, hey, tell us about some of your experiences. Have you ever had to deal with any adversity? And it's like, yeah, I have, like, and explain why. So, yeah, so the portal for him, again, it was more of a situation where he just was not playing at all. Mentally, he wasn't I didn't think, and Aaron didn't think was in a great headspace after not being playing, and just thought a restart for him would make more sense.
It's obviously a much different collegiate environment than the one you grew up in, and you went to the University of Michigan. Things worked out extremely well there for you, but I wanna go back. You did talk about playing a lot of different sports when you were a kid. Again, I know we're going back in time, but what was your youth sports experience like, and when did you decide, "Okay, hockey's where I need to start putting most or all of my attention?"
Yeah, so I started playing hockey like a lot of kids in Canada at 5 years old, right? And fell in love with the game immediately. But at that time, I also played soccer. So I played soccer from 5 to 11, continued to play hockey the whole way through. Started playing baseball at the same time when I was 5. Played school sports, basketball, volleyball. So I played baseball from the time I was 5 until the summer when I turned 16 years old. And then at that time, it was just overlapping a little bit too much with my hockey. So when I was 16 years old at hockey, that was the first time they were starting to have some of these summer showcases, like college showcases where, colleges could come and watch you. So baseball was kind of getting in the way. So I'm like, hockey's my game. I'm going to do that. But I'm like, I still have a little bit of time on my hands. So I signed up and played lacrosse. So 16 years old, lacrosse in Maple Ridge came in when I think I was 14 or 15. It wasn't around when I was growing up, so I didn't have a chance to play it. But I had some buddies that played the year before. They're like, "Oh man, you're gonna love lacrosse. Like, come play." I'm like, "Okay." So I played lacrosse as a 16-year-old summer, and it was a phenomenal game. Like it was great. And then after that year, so I just turned 17, so then I went and played junior hockey in Penticton. So basically, I went hockey full time, you could say, when I was 16 turning 17.
That's a much different experience than a lot of kids in youth hockey in Canada have right now. As you know, many of them specialize much earlier, and we've talked about that a little bit. What was your parents' role in all of this? Were your parents hands-on parents? Were they drop you off at the rink parents? What was their general attitude toward youth sport?
So hands-on, my dad was very hands-on, and my dad never played hockey at a high level. I mean, he didn't even play organized hockey as a kid. Shinny hockey. He still plays hockey to this day, men's league. He's pushing 80 years old, but he's on the ice, I think, 4 times a week. He loves it. But as far as my dad being like a high level hockey player, he wasn't. But the one thing that my dad did and what he instilled in me was a work ethic and always expecting when you step on the ice, like I think my parents knew I was a good player when I was younger. I showed that on the ice, but I would hear it after a game from my dad if he didn't felt like I'd worked to my ability, right? If there were some games where I took a game off and just kind of relied purely on, oh, I'm a skilled player. So that was his message to me all the time is never take a night off, right? Always put your best foot forward and like you control how much you work, right? So that was his message. Where my mom was more, I'm not gonna say they were good cop, bad cop, but my mom was very motherly in a sense, very supportive, always in tune with my emotions as a kid, you know, always making sure I was okay. I'm not saying my dad didn't do that, but my mom was definitely the one that, if things, emotionally weren't great or something, she was kind of my pillar, right? So my dad coached me basically from the time I started playing hockey until the time I was 16 years old. So all the way up. But he would always coach the defense. He would never coach the forward. So I never had direct interactions with him on the bench. So very involved at all the games and practices, etc. And then he also coached me in baseball. So my dad was very, very involved and was always there and coached a lot. And my mom, I don't think she ever missed a game. She was there and you know, growing up in the lower mainland, there wasn't a lot of ice time. So I remember our practice time was like 5 a.m. on Monday mornings. So we had early, early practices. So I remember, for some reason my dad had to go to work early in the morning. Either my mom would take me or I'd have one of my good buddies that lived around the corner. His dad would take us. But yeah, my parents were pretty hands-on and involved. And my mom was very athletic. She has 4 brothers. They all were good athletes. So she kind of came from an athletic family.
It sounds to me like they were proud of things that were not goals, assists, points. They were not proud of scoreboard stuff. I'm sure they liked seeing you achieve in that regard, but it doesn't sound like those are the things they emphasize. And I also think it's a really important point you make about your mom being supportive from an emotional and perhaps mental state and them sharing that load and figuring out what you needed in terms of support, not just one way all the time.
Yeah, and I see that with myself and Aaron at times, right? There's different dynamics to every kid emotionally, what they need. Sometimes I have certain kids that need me to push them, and then they'll go to Aaron for more positive reinforcement. And sometimes it's vice versa. Okay, Aaron, you need to step in here and you need to kind of, and I can be this, right? So, we have that relationship where we kind of share that responsibility, I guess, if you will. With my parents, I think early on in that for sure with my dad, it was more not so much results based. It was work ethic, compete, intensity every time you step on the ice. And if you do those things, results will be there because you're a good enough player, but you can't just rely on stepping on the ice and hoping it happens. Right. So that was the biggest message. Like, don't leave anything in doubt. Go make it happen. And if you do that, results will be there. And if you have those results, ultimately you're going to get attention.
Well, it's interesting given the way your career played out because you were the top skill guy for a very long time. As I mentioned earlier, you're a Hobie Baker Award winner as the top player in NCAA hockey. And yet, when you got to the National Hockey League and you're breaking in with the New Jersey Devils and then finding your form with the Vancouver Canucks, it was that versatility and that work ethic that really allowed you to get your foot, or in this case, your skate in the door, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you really think about it, most of the players that get to the highest level are players that produce, right, when they're younger. And there's some outliers for sure. let's say the majority of them are offensive skilled guys. And again, we talk about that pyramid. So you get up to the top of the pyramid at the peak in NHL. Well, now you have, let's say, 90% of the players are guys that have always been the guy offensively. Well, when you break down a team at the highest level, typically you have your top six, which would be considered your real offensive players. Some teams, if you're deep, have nine, right? Your top three lines that can contribute scoring wise. Then you kind of have a depth line, momentum line, maybe a checking line, right? That has size and grit, and they're more of a north south straightforward line. So if you don't fit in that top six, if you want to stay at the highest level and play there, what are you willing to do in order to prove that you can stay there and be effective? So, can you kill penalties? Can you win faceoffs? Are you responsible defensively? Like, if you're not on a line that's scoring goals, you better not be on a line that's getting scored on all the time. So all these different things, or if you're a larger body, like which I wasn't, like, are you a fourth line guy that's going to dump the puck in and grind and wear another team's D man? No, I'm not going to do that personally. So what else can you do? Like how can you adapt to do that? So you're right. So I was always a guy that produced a ton of points as a young player through college, junior college, even my first year pro in Albany. I put up big numbers. Then I step into New Jersey, which had a very, very deep team, right? Dougie Gilmore, like Hall of Famer, Andrew Chuck, Hall of Famer. We got Bobby Holik there, Sikora, Elias, Arnott, Claude Lemieux, Brian Ralston, Bobby Carpenter. And at that time, Bobby Carpenter, I mean, he was our checking line center and he'd scored 50 goals a few years before. Jay Pandolfo scored, I think, 38 goals at BU. Now he's on the checking line. Brodeur, Scotty Stevens, Scott Niedermayer. It's like, okay, where do you fit in here? Like, where do you fit in? So I remember, like, I would play on the top power play, be like Niedermayer, Arnott, Sikora, Elias, and myself. And then I would play on the fourth line with like Sasha Lakovic and Christoph Oliwa, right? So you you have to figure it out or you're not going to play. So that was kind of my introduction to the NHL. Like, okay, I know I belong here or I feel like I belong, but you need to adapt if you want to get in the lineup. So what are you doing to stay in the lineup? Now I knew my skill set was okay, I was a good power play guy, so I could help there. But 4-on-4 now, okay, you're not playing with guys that are finishers or playmakers. So when you go out there with those guys, just try to get pucks deep and don't get scored on because you get scored on, you're not going to play. So I learned, in college through Red Berenson, to be a little bit more aware defensively. And that awareness defensively over time, my first couple years pro, I think really helped me in my career, being relied upon because my coach, Red Berenson at Michigan, told me, listen, like you're an offensive player, which is great, right? You put up numbers and, if your team's losing, you're a guy that they're going to go to. But what about this? What about if you're up a goal in the third period and your coach is trying to preserve a lead and he doesn't trust you defensively? Do you want to sit on the bench for the whole third period? Or do you want to be a guy that's relied upon that can go out there and do that job? And then it kind of really resonated. No, I want to play in all situations. I want to be counted on in any situation. So that's when I started to become a little bit more cognizant of playing defense.
Well, I think it's one of the undervalued parts of playing multiple sports. And I have no idea if you were the best lacrosse player, soccer player, baseball player on those teams that you referenced earlier, but I know you were probably the best hockey player on a lot of your teams growing up. But in those other sports, and Gareth Reese has mentioned this, and Jesse Marsh has mentioned this on this podcast, when they would play other sports, they weren't always the guy. So they had to figure out how they could positively contribute without being the star player of those teams. Is that something that your experience in those other sports taught you as well?
For sure. So I would say baseball, I was always one of the better players. Lacrosse, one of the better players, but like volleyball and basketball, probably was not. But again, found a way to grind it out. Hey, how can I contribute? I want to be on the court with my buddies. I don't want to be just cheerleading on the bench, right? I want to be involved. I mean, everybody wants to play, but some people are willing to do more than others to be out there to play, right? So it's basically, what are you willing to do? Like, how much does it matter to you? How much do you care? What are you willing to sacrifice so you can be out there? I mean, that's a valid point, right? If you're not always like the guy, how can you help contribute to your team to have success?
Well, it's a nice segue into where we're at in youth sports right now, specifically in Canada, but I imagine it's exactly this way in the States. In fact, I know it is. And I'm talking about willingness because there's a cost associated with it and there's a time constraint associated with it now that's a little bit different than when you and I were growing up. Jumpstart just came out with its State of Youth Sport in Canada 2026. This report just came out. And one of the things it found, Brendan, is that a third of Canadian families who responded to this survey said they have stress about the affordability of the sports their kids are in. 25% of them said they're overwhelmed by the logistics of trying to get them from place to place and all of the different things that come with youth sports. I'm wondering what your level of concern is from that standpoint, because it does feel like the youth sports world is far more pressurized and complex and costly than it ever has been.
Well, and again, more costly based on that pyramiding, like we talked about, right? Like academies, right? Schools, people spending 30 to $70,000 a year to send your kid to an academy. Listen, each to their own. I can't, generalize everything. I mean, maybe some situations, maybe you don't have a good school in your area, and this is the only option to get an education. There's extenuating circumstances in any decision, but for people just to think, oh, I'm going to spend that much money, that's going to equate to success for my kid. Well, you've completely lost the plot. You're delusional. That's not it. Um, But yeah, the cost is a huge deal for sure. I know, even having the ability to compare it between Canada and the US, like I know, for example, I have a friend that coaches ladies hockey team out in Anaheim, the Anaheim Lady Ducks. So those parents, because there's not a lot of local games in California for kids to drive to, their cost at the beginning of the year is $25,000 US to play hockey for the season. So this covers, obviously your ice time, uh, games, practices, but that also includes the player's travel. But still, 25K to have your kid play hockey. So think about that. You got to make almost $50,000 pre-tax money to have your kid play hockey, right? Which is astronomical. And I know even in Canada, like we talked about earlier, HBL costs are getting up there, school costs are getting up there. It's a huge investment, and that's why, like we touched on earlier, I think a lot of these parents, the emotional and financial investment, they need a return, or they want to see a return immediately. So I just think again, it's tough. I don't know how we rein that in. I don't know how we take a step back from that now that the floodgates are kind of open, right? But you think about it, minor hockey, how we knew it growing up, it's almost extinct, right? Like with all these academies now and options for these kids to do other things, like before it was, okay, you lived in Burnaby, or you lived in Vancouver, you lived on the North Shore, you lived in Maple Ridge, Ridge Meadows, you all played in this area. Yeah, sure, some teams had better players there, but so what? When I was in Ridge Meadows, my team was brutal up until we were probably in Bantam. And then in Bantam, we started to, had improvements, and whether that was maybe just learning lessons over these years and getting beat by these teams in like Adam and Pee Wee and pushing us to be better. But by the time we were in Bantam, we made provincials. In midget, we made provincials. So there's something to be said about not always having the best team and getting pushed to have incentive to get better. And the other thing with these best teams all the time is, you know, if you're a kid that goes to a best or an elite program, let's say you're not in the top six there, right? So maybe you're not getting power play opportunities, and maybe you're not getting as much ice time. But maybe if you stayed in your community, you are that guy. Now you're out there on every power play. You're getting more touches. You're being able to try more things, but it's not as glamorous as being on that other elite team, right? That's winning all these games, but you're not getting the touches or the experience that you'd be getting somewhere else. So sometimes we get caught up in this, it's almost like an egotistical thing. And again, I'm not saying that's for everybody, but sometimes that plays into, well, our team is this and that. Who gives a crap, man? Like, honestly, at the end of the day, it does not matter I don't think how good your team is when you're 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 years old. It's not your job at that age. It's not your business. Coaches aren't getting fired for wins and losses. Obviously, when you get older, yes, you want to be on the best team because you want to win. That's your job. But at this early age, we've kind of gotten away from that.
No, you're absolutely right. And I do think that some of it is a status among parents, and that translates down to the kids as well. That got to have three A's on the hockey jersey, not two, because that says something about me as a person. And to your point earlier, if that's the message that gets sent at a young age, there are going to be problems later down the road because now your identity and your self worth is tied to your result in the game as opposed to what you focused on a little bit earlier, which is work ethic. How much of a conversation is that with kids today when you're coaching that identity piece and that self worth piece, given where we are with the mental health discussion right now?
Well, it's, kind of meshes with the word of entitlement a little bit, right? Like because you are playing at a certain on a certain team or at a certain level, you feel a sense of entitlement, like you should be getting this, you should be getting that, which to me, that's one of my biggest pet peeves is the sense of that people have entitlement. I don't care who you are, what you've done, or where you're from. To ever put yourself on a pedestal is, in my opinion, completely offside. Is something that really rubs me the wrong way. Like, just to think that you deserve something is not how I was ever raised, and that's not how I'm trying to raise my kids. It's like, you need to work for everything. You need to be a good person. Don't expect things to be handed to you, and always be very appreciative for opportunities that you're given, be thankful, and if you're given an opportunity, then it's your job to make the most of it. It's not just gonna happen, like, just because you're from here or you played there, like, go out and earn it, right? But, I do see, yes, at a young age, this kind of entitlement to, well, I deserve this or I deserve that. Well, what have you done? Even if you did something last year, you still need to work to get that again this year. But like that's my kind of mentality or thought on it.
And you bring up a really good point about talent selection versus talent identification. And too often those two get confused. When you're selecting your rep team at U11 in whatever sport, that is a snapshot in time of who the coaches of that particular sport feel are the best representatives at that point. But that doesn't mean that's going to be the same at U13 or U15 or U17. And too often, I think we make that mistake, Brendan, of, oh no, we're identifying talent. Go look at any draft of the NHL, the NFL. They can't get it right at that level with 18 to 22-year-olds. And those people are being paid millions of dollars to identify talent. And yet, for some reason, we think at 11 years old, we can decide who's going to be in the National Hockey League or who's going to be playing for the Canadian national soccer or basketball team. It blows my mind.
Well, I know this is a good quote from an old GM of mine, Lou Lamorello. He said, "Potential is a very dangerous word." Right? Potential is a very dangerous word. And you're right. Even so, like you touched on, at the elite level, like you said, you're investing millions of dollars into your scouting staff for that. I mean, there are a lot of misses, right? On how somebody's game is going to translate to the top level, right? So how do you do that when kids are still maturing, they're still growing? But I think a lot of times and I think back to my youth days in the lower mainland, there were probably some players, like, I was always good, always one of the best for sure, but there were other players that were right there, if not maybe had a little bit better than me, but maybe because they matured a lot quicker than I did, like, they were bigger, stronger, faster, so you see that all the time. So this kid's dominating this game. Now, is it because he's bigger, stronger, faster, he's matured a little bit quicker? Or is he still or is this kid, wow, this kid is, like, he's still a little bit physically immature, but look at what he's doing out there. Look at how he's thinking the game. Look at the decisions he's making instead of, oh, he's just picking the puck up behind his net and he's just blowing by everybody and going down there because that's what he can do. Yeah, like talent, you said there, evaluating talent and choosing teams. It's tricky and it evolves and changes all the time.
Well, and I think all of these things coalesce back into that pressure environment we talked about. The money's gotten way higher. The time commitment's gotten way higher. And also this fear of parents that their child is not going to be discovered or seen if they're not on this quote unquote elite or high performance track with this particular team or this particular program. Now, to your point earlier, there are great players that come out of community minor hockey or soccer or whatever those programs happen to be. And I'm a believer that we live in a day and age where they're not going to miss at the top levels. They will find the talent. They don't really care where you played, but parents do seem to be under this supposition that their kids need to be in a particular pathway. Where do you stand on that issue?
I think, especially at an early age, I really don't think it matters, right? Like, I really don't think it matters. If, like you said, if they're a good enough player over time, okay, at some point, you're going to have to prove that, the so-called best players for your age group, you're going to have to make a transition to get there. But do you need to do that at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old? I don't personally think so. That's my own personal opinion on it. And as you mentioned, with the technology nowadays, I mean, social media, if you're good enough, you're not going to fall through the cracks, right? Like, I mean, there's all these platforms now, even again, going back to hockey. If your team is doing this video platform, like I can go in, log in, I can pull up a kid pretty much anywhere that has these live barn arenas, and I can just watch a video on a kid, right? And it's like, oh, somebody talks about a kid, and next thing you know, in back in our time, it was like, oh, I'm gonna need to hop on a plane or travel or fly somewhere to go see this kid. Now it's like right on the computer, pull him up. I can watch all his shifts. I can watch this, and it's like, oh. So like to your point, if you're that good, or if you keep, it's not even that good. If you keep progressing, right? If you keep trending upwards, I mean, you're going to get there eventually, and you're not going to fall through the cracks.
Because you're so involved with coaching and you're still in it as a parent as well, I'd love to hear your opinion on where we're at with coaches and referees as well. Because one of the things that I heard from someone at Hockey Canada a number of months ago is we're losing coaches and we're having trouble retaining referees because of the pressure of the environment. And a lot of it does point back to parents. I ran into someone who's been coaching high school sports for over 30 years the other day. Just met this man. He said the exact same thing to me. He said, we're losing coaches and we're losing referees. This seems to be a constant problem. Is it one that you're witnessing as well because of the environment we've created around youth sports?
I think so. Like I think again, you talk about like the narrative of referees and that. I mean, listen, it's got to be one of the toughest jobs in sports is being a referee. And then you add on to the fact you're at a youth game and you have a kid, he's 12, again, 13, 14 years old out there making these quick decisions. I mean, you watch the NHL, I think back in time now, Scotty, how many goals do you think were offside in for decades, right? And you have the best referees in the world. And now we're watching video, we're slowing it down by like a thousandth of a second, and you're being able to determine they're offside in that. So these guys, even at the top level, aren't perfect. They have a tough job. So parents who think it's their right or they have the right to get on these young kids who are referees, I have no time for them at all. And I think they should be out of arenas, and I can't stand it. I had an interaction last year. I was at a game and I was just watching a team play. And there were two guys to the right of me. And again, I never say anything to anybody. And this young kid was out there, and these guys are yelling at this young referee, right? And he was having a bit of a tough game, but I finally said to him, I said, "Hey," and it took me everything to do this. I'm like, "Hey," I said, "how would you like it if that was your kid refereeing that game, or a kid that you know, and you had guys up here yelling at him?" And they said, "Well, he's got to be better." I'm like, "It's a freaking kid out there. It's a kid refereeing this game, trying to do the best he can." I said, "Everybody on that ice is making mistakes." I said, "Even like you watch any professional game, player, whoever, there's nobody in the history of pro sports in any sport who's played a perfect game. Like, have a little compassion for this person." They kind of, quieted down after that. But I mean, I'm at the point now where I feel like, with my experience and going through it, like if I don't say anything to somebody like that, who is going to, right? And like, I almost feel like I have more of a voice now just based on some experience. I've done this a couple times even with my girls' soccer. Like, you have the parent group who have an issue about something, right? And everybody's on board like that this is happening, but no one wants to say anything for fear their kid's going to suffer the repercussions. Fine. I'm like, I don't care. I'll say what's going to happen. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, so I do think there's times when you need to stand up and communicate for what you believe in, but you got to do it the right way as well. I know I kind of went off base there, but now with coaching, I do see that, one, coaching is a huge time commitment. I don't know if everybody understands the time commitment. Two, I mean, there are some programs that do pay, but for the majority, I mean, hey, these coaches might get their expenses covered for the year, right? So three, you're not getting a lot of coaches who have families, right? That are going to want to travel and be away and put all this time in and be away from their family unless they're getting paid. But again, that goes with an increase in cost now. So it's this kind of cycle that we're going through. The one thing I will say about coaching, and I've seen this a few different places, is I 100% disagree with not allowing parents to coach. And here's my issue with that is if you're going to vet a coach, vet him, whether he's a parent or not a parent. Like, if you have somebody who has a background, who's played high level, whatever sport it is, and they have something to offer to the team just because he's a parent, you're not going to let him coach. Oh, I don't understand that. Like, vet them. If they're not a good person, understandable. We don't want them behind the bench. But if they have the credentials, they have something to offer your kid, they're going to be at every practice or game. I think it's ludicrous not to have that person behind the bench for fear that they're going to, show favoritism towards their kid. I would say probably 1 to 2% of people who coach their kids show favoritism towards their kids. In my experience, everyone I know is harder on their kids than anybody else. So I think that is part of the issue in some places where you're not getting enough coaches because I talked about, it's a big time commitment. People maybe with other families don't want to put the time in because they're away from their family. They're not making any money. So you have a pool of coaches that are there all the time, have the credentials, but you don't want them behind the bench because their kids on the team. I don't agree with that. I really don't. And I've seen it happen in several places where, oh, you think there's coaches lined up to coach the team. Well, there's not. So I went through this in Calgary where we had guys that were qualified, but the board wouldn't allow them to coach because their kid was on the team. But what do we do? Oh, we're going to get a kid who's just coming out of junior. He's 18 or 19 years old, never had any coaching experience in his life. There's nobody else that's available to coach the team, but we're going to plug him in there to coach the team because he doesn't have a kid on the team. And I'm like, what are we doing here? Like this, we have this over here compared to this. Maybe if that junior kid wants to coach, have him come in and learn and mentor under the other, guy who's qualified, right? So I think that's an issue with coaching in a lot of these places. We don't want parent coaches for fear of what it looks like optically. Instead of a board, you come out and say, you know what? No, we've vetted this guy. We've interviewed people. We've talked to him. He's more than qualified, and he's a good person. He's going to do a good job.
Well, and that part you mentioned at the end, and you said it in the middle of the interview as well, a good person. I would like to see that as a big part of the vetting process for every single sport, because I do think that there are times that boards or organizations get these applications in and they see experience in the sport. They have no idea how they deal with kids. And that to me, like as a parent, is so much more important than whatever technical skills you think you're going to teach my kid. Yes, I want my child to improve in the sport that she's playing in this year, but I want her to be treated with respect. I don't want her to be yelled at. I don't want any form of archaic coaching in there. And too often, I'm not sure that's screened for, Brendan.
Well, we're on the same page because just because you're qualified with experience, have been played at a high level, if you're not a good person or you don't treat the kids well, then you're not allowed behind the bench. I mean, that's number one, good person. But that's why you bet these people, right? Whoever it is. And that way, I think you could help solve some of the coaching shortages with involving parents more that are qualified, but more importantly, are good people.
Well, and I also think we incentivized it with tax incentives or stipends, especially with community and school sports. We would get higher level of applicants, higher volume of applicants, but that is a different discussion for a different day. We've spoken for a long time, and I often save this question for last, so I'll throw the toughest one at you at the end. What do you believe is currently the biggest issue in youth sports today?
Hmm, that's a good question. Well, I think I touched on it right out of the gate, and I think we're trying to pyramid these kids too early. I think we think we have an elite group at whatever age group, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, and you're discounting, you know, 80% of the kids that are playing the game because maybe they're not there right now, maybe for whatever reason, but physically, mentally, everyone develops at different ages. But I think having these all-star teams and elite teams at early ages is really one of the biggest issues in amateur sport.
Brandon, this has been a fantastic conversation. I always appreciate when you have time to share it with me. And I know that there's a lot of parents out there that are going to benefit greatly from this. Thank you very much for sharing your insight and perspective with everyone out there on Better Sports Parents.
Well, I appreciate you reaching out. I know we've been trying to do this for a little while now, and it's always good to reminisce a little bit, but chat about serious topics, right? I mean, this is a hot topic right now, and hopefully, I've been able to provide some insight into the experiences that I've had as a kid growing up and raising four kids that really are all Division One athletes, and everyone has a different path, and just again, perspective, have the right expectations, and at the end of the day, just make sure your kids are learning good life skills.
I hope you enjoyed this episode and you found some tangible takeaways that you can bring with you in your journey to becoming a better sports parent. The best way for you to support this podcast is for you to subscribe, follow, rate, review, and drop us a comment on whichever platform you're watching or listening. And the fastest way for us to grow this podcast and reach more parents out there is for you to share it with your respective networks and to tell people that you see at your youth sporting events when you're there with your children. Big thanks to Lightstock Music and Andre Diaconou for the music on this podcast, which is a production of Toolkit Content. Until next time, happy sports parenting. And remember, have fun out there. That's what it's supposed to be about.